Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Natchez, Mississippi. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching us from and the exact time you are listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing to what places and at what moments of the day or night these documented accounts reach. In 1831, the Mississippi River carved its muddy path past the bluffs of Natchez, carrying with it the secrets of a society built on cotton and human bondage. The grand mansions that crowned the hill overlooking the river bore witness to countless stories of wealth and suffering, but none would prove as haunting as the case of Isabel Walker, a young woman whose beauty became both her blessing and her curse. The Walker plantation stretched across 3,000 acres of fertile bottomland, where the morning mist rose from fields of white cotton like ghosts departing from their earthly concerns. Thomas Walker, the plantation owner, had inherited not only the land from his father, but also a collection of enslaved people whose lives were recorded in ledgers, with the same detachment used for livestock inventories. Among these entries, one name appeared repeatedly in correspondence between neighboring plantations: Isabel, described in sale inquiries as possessing unusual beauty and education. Isabel Walker had been born on the plantation in 1813, the daughter of a woman named Sarah who worked in the main house. Records from the Natchez Presbyterian Church show her baptism that same year, though the entry contains an unusual notation in faded ink that suggests some uncertainty about her parentage. By 1831, she had grown into a young woman of 18, whose appearance drew attention throughout the county, a fact that would later prove significant to investigators trying to piece together the events of that autumn. The Walker household operated under the strict supervision of Millicent Walker, Thomas's wife, who maintained detailed records of daily activities in a leather-bound journal discovered decades later in the attic of the family home. These entries, written in precise handwriting, reveal a woman obsessed with order and control, documenting everything from the consumption of sugar to the movements of the house staff. In the months preceding Isabel's disappearance, these entries became increasingly focused on what Millicent described as disruptions to the household routine. During the summer of 1831, visitors to the Walker plantation frequently mentioned Isabel in their correspondence. Judge Harrison Caldwell, a family friend who often dined at the Walker table, noted in a letter to his brother in New Orleans that the young woman possessed an education that seemed unusual for her station, speaking French and playing piano with considerable skill. These accomplishments, according to several accounts from the period, had been encouraged by Thomas Walker himself, who had provided her with books from his personal library. The arrangement at the Walker plantation differed from the typical structure found on neighboring properties. Isabel lived not in the slave quarters that housed the field hands, but in a small room adjacent to the main house, a detail that appeared in multiple witness statements collected years later. Her duties included serving at formal dinners, maintaining the household's correspondence, and providing musical entertainment for guests. This proximity to the family's private affairs would later prove crucial to understanding the events that followed. According to the plantation records, tensions had been building throughout the summer months. Several neighboring plantation owners had made inquiries about purchasing Isabel, offers that Thomas Walker had consistently refused. Among these was Colonel Marcus Thornfield, whose plantation bordered the Walker property to the south. Thornfield's letters, preserved in the Adams County Courthouse archives, show increasingly aggressive attempts to acquire Isabel, culminating in an offer of $3,000, an extraordinary sum for the period. The summer heat of 1831 brought with it an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to weigh heavily on the Walker household. Millicent's journal entries from July describe sleepless nights and strange sounds coming from the direction of Isabel's quarters. She wrote of conversations that ceased abruptly when she approached, and of finding Isabel standing at windows overlooking the river at odd hours of the night. These observations, dismissed at the time as the typical concerns of a plantation mistress, would later take on a more sinister significance. On the evening of August 15th, the Walker family hosted their annual harvest celebration, an event that drew prominent families from throughout Adams County. The guest list, preserved in Millicent's social records, included several individuals whose names would surface repeatedly in subsequent investigations. Among them was Dr. Edmund Fairfax, a physician whose practice extended throughout the Natchez district and whose private journals, discovered in 1958, contained disturbing entries about his observations of plantation life. Isabel's performance that evening, playing piano for the assembled guests, was described by multiple witnesses as exceptional, but somehow melancholy. Sarah Pemberton, the wife of a neighboring plantation owner, later told investigators that Isabel seemed distracted, frequently glancing toward the windows that faced the river. Mrs. Pemberton noted that when she complimented Isabel's playing, the young woman's response was barely audible, and her hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages of her sheet music. The evening concluded without incident, according to the official accounts, but Dr. Fairfax's private writings suggest a different story. His journal entry for that date, written in the coded shorthand he used for sensitive observations, describes a conversation he overheard between Thomas Walker and Colonel Thornfield in the library after the other guests had departed. The coded text, when deciphered by historians in the 1960s, reveals a heated discussion about arrangements that had been made without Millicent's knowledge. September brought the cotton harvest, and with it the seasonal influx of workers and traders who converged on Natchez from throughout the Mississippi River Valley. The increased activity on the plantation provided cover for meetings and transactions that might otherwise have drawn attention. During this period, Millicent's journal entries became sporadic and increasingly cryptic, often consisting of single words or phrases that seemed to reference events she chose not to describe in detail. Isabel's daily routine during September followed a pattern that would later prove significant to investigators. Each morning, she would walk to the plantation's chapel, a small building that had been constructed by Thomas Walker's father as a gesture toward respectability. The chapel had fallen into disuse, serving primarily as storage for old furniture and documents, but Isabel had taken to spending long periods there, ostensibly for prayer and reflection. Millicent's journal notes these visits, but expresses increasing concern about their frequency and duration. The chapel itself held secrets that would not be discovered until many years later. Built with a foundation that extended deep into the bluff's limestone, it contained a basement area that was not shown on any architectural plans. This space, accessible through a hidden entrance behind the altar, had apparently been used for purposes that the Walker family preferred to keep private. When finally explored in 1963 by researchers investigating the property's history, the basement contained items that suggested it had served as more than simple storage. If you're enjoying the story and feel like helping the channel with any amount, please support us by clicking the thanks button and donating whatever you wish. This really helps the channel keep posting new stories. On September 20th, a traveling merchant named Cornelius Beck arrived at the Walker plantation carrying goods from New Orleans. Beck's account ledger, preserved in the Louisiana State Archives, shows that he conducted business not only with Thomas Walker, but also with several other plantation owners in the area. His records indicate sales of jewelry, fine fabrics, and what he euphemistically termed specialty items for discerning clients. Beck remained at the plantation for 3 days, during which time several significant changes occurred in the household routine. Millicent's journal entry for September 21st consists of a single line. The matter has been arranged according to Thomas's wishes. The brevity of this entry stands in stark contrast to her usually detailed records, and suggests that she was reluctant to document the specifics of whatever arrangement had been made. Contemporary correspondence between other plantation families indicates that Beck was known for facilitating transactions that wealthy landowners preferred to keep confidential. Isabel's final confirmed appearance was on the evening of September 22nd, when she served dinner to the Walker family and their guest, Dr. Fairfax. The physician's journal describes her as appearing unusually pale, and noting that her hands shook when she poured wine. He observed that she wore an ornate necklace that he had not seen before, featuring pearls and garnets set in an intricate gold design. This jewelry would later become a crucial element in the investigation that followed her disappearance. The following morning, Isabel was nowhere to be found. Her small room appeared undisturbed, with her few personal belongings still in their usual places. However, the bed had not been slept in, and the window overlooking the garden remained open despite the cool morning air. Thomas Walker's initial response to her absence was to suggest that she had simply wandered off and would return when she grew hungry, a casual dismissal that struck several observers as inappropriate given the circumstances. Millicent's reaction to the disappearance was markedly different from her husband's. Her journal entry for September 23rd reads, "God forgive us for what we have allowed. The floor of the chapel requires attention." These cryptic words would not be fully understood until decades later, when investigators finally gained access to the hidden areas beneath the building. The reference to the chapel floor proved to be particularly significant, as it was there that the first physical evidence of Isabel's fate would eventually be discovered. The initial search for Isabel followed the standard procedures used when enslaved people went missing. Notices were posted in the Natchez newspapers, and neighboring plantation owners were asked to watch for a young woman matching her description. However, these efforts seemed perfunctory, lacking the urgency typically associated with valuable property that had gone missing. Several contemporary observers noted that Thomas Walker appeared more concerned with managing gossip than with actually recovering Isabel. Dr. Fairfax's subsequent visits to the Walker plantation were documented in his appointment records, but his personal journal suggests these were not professional calls. His entries describe increasing unease about what he had witnessed and knowledge that he felt obligated to keep confidential due to his relationship with the Walker family. The physician's growing distress is evident in his increasingly illegible handwriting and his references to sleepless nights, troubled by what he described as scenes that haunted his memory. Winter arrived early in 1831, bringing with it a cold that seemed to settle permanently over the Walker plantation. Neighbors reported that the main house no longer hosted the social gatherings that had been regular features of previous seasons. Millicent Walker was seen less frequently in Natchez society, and when she did appear, observers noted a dramatic change in her demeanor. Previously known for her animated conversation and attention to social detail, she had become withdrawn and spoke in monosyllables when addressed. The plantation's operations continued through the winter months, but several workers reported disturbing incidents that suggested all was not well. Sounds emanating from the chapel at night prompted some of the field hands to avoid that area of the property after dark. These reports were dismissed by the overseer as superstition, but the consistency of the accounts suggests that something was indeed occurring near the abandoned building. Thomas Walker's behavior during this period also drew attention from those who knew him well. A man previously known for his sociability and business acumen began to withdraw from his usual activities. His correspondence with other plantation owners became terse and infrequent, and he declined invitations to participate in the social events that had previously been central to his routine. Judge Caldwell noted in a letter to his wife that Walker had aged considerably in the months following Isabel's disappearance and seemed to startle at unexpected sounds. Spring brought new developments that would eventually shed light on Isabel's fate. In April of 1832, Cornelius Beck was arrested in New Orleans on charges related to the trafficking of stolen goods. Among the items seized from his possession were pieces of jewelry that matched descriptions of items that had reportedly belonged to Isabel Walker. The necklace that Dr. Fairfax had observed her wearing on her final evening was among these pieces, its distinctive design making it easily identifiable. The arrest of Beck prompted a more serious investigation into Isabel's disappearance. Adams County Sheriff William Morrison traveled to New Orleans to question the merchant about his activities at the Walker plantation. Beck's statements, recorded in the sheriff's official report, revealed a network of arrangements between traveling merchants and plantation owners that went far beyond simple commercial transactions. These arrangements, according to Beck's account, often involved the discreet removal of individuals whose presence had become problematic for their owners. Beck's confession, given in exchange for leniency in his sentencing, provided disturbing details about the events of September 1831. According to his statement, Thomas Walker had contacted him specifically to arrange for Isabel's removal from the plantation. The arrangement, as Beck described it, was intended to solve what Walker characterized as a complicated situation that threatened his family's reputation and social standing. The specific nature of this complication was not detailed in the surviving records, but the implications were clear enough to contemporary investigators. The revelation that Isabel had not simply run away, but had been deliberately removed from the plantation, prompted Sheriff Morrison to obtain a warrant to search the Walker property. The search, conducted in May of 1832, focused initially on the main house and the slave quarters, but found nothing of immediate significance. However, when investigators examined the chapel, they discovered evidence that the building had been used for purposes beyond religious services. The hidden basement beneath the chapel altar contained items that painted a disturbing picture of Isabel's final days. Among these were pieces of clothing that matched descriptions of garments she had worn, as well as personal items that had belonged to her. Most significantly, investigators found what appeared to be restraints and other equipment that suggested the space had been used to confine someone against their will. The limestone walls showed signs of recent disturbance, particularly in one corner where the earth appeared to have been dug up and replaced. Dr. Fairfax was called upon to examine the evidence found in the chapel basement. His official report, filed with Sheriff Morrison, noted that the physical evidence was consistent with someone having been held in the space for an extended period. His private journal entries from this time reveal his horror at discovering that his suspicions about Isabel's fate had been correct, and his anguish at not having acted on his concerns when she was still alive. The investigation into Isabel's disappearance revealed a web of complicity that extended beyond the Walker family. Several neighboring plantation owners were found to have knowledge of the arrangement with Beck and had provided assistance in covering up the evidence of Isabel's fate. The network of silence that protected these families was typical of the society that dominated Natchez, where reputation and social standing often took precedence over justice or human decency. Millicent Walker's journal entries from the period following the discovery of evidence in the chapel basement show her complete mental collapse. Her handwriting became increasingly erratic, and her entries often consisted of repetitive phrases about guilt and punishment. By summer of 1832, she had been confined to her room and was no longer capable of managing household affairs. Her final journal entry, dated July 4, 1832, reads, "Isabel watches from the water. I see her when the moon is dark. Thomas Walker's response to the investigation was to deny any knowledge of Isabel's fate beyond what he had already stated. He maintained that she had simply disappeared and that any evidence found on his property had been placed there by others seeking to implicate him in wrongdoing. This defense proved unconvincing to investigators, particularly given Beck's detailed confession and the physical evidence found in the chapel basement. The legal proceedings that followed were complicated by the social and political realities of antebellum Mississippi. Despite clear evidence of wrongdoing, securing convictions against prominent plantation owners proved difficult. The case against Thomas Walker was eventually dismissed due to what the court termed insufficient evidence, though contemporary observers understood that political influence had played a significant role in this outcome. Cornelius Beck received a relatively light sentence and was released from prison after serving less than 2 years. The Walker plantation never recovered from the scandal surrounding Isabel's disappearance. Social ostracism from neighboring families, combined with the psychological toll on both Thomas and Millicent Walker, led to the property's gradual decline. By 1835, most of the enslaved people had been sold to pay mounting debts, and the grand house began to show signs of neglect. Thomas Walker died in 1837. Reportedly while sitting in his library reading correspondence about debts that could never be repaid. Millicent Walker survived her husband by only 2 years, spending her final days in the care of distant relatives who had reluctantly agreed to provide for her. Her death in 1839 was attributed to what physicians of the time termed nervous exhaustion, though those familiar with the case understood that guilt and grief had consumed her entirely. The Walker property was sold at auction, and the new owners demolished the chapel within months of taking possession. The fate of Isabel's remains was never definitively established. Despite extensive searches of the plantation grounds, no burial site was ever discovered. Some investigators theorized that her body had been disposed of in the Mississippi River, which would explain why no trace was ever found. Others suggested that the limestone caves that honeycombed the bluffs around Natchez might have provided a hiding place that would never be discovered. The truth died with those who had participated in the conspiracy of silence. Dr. Fairfax continued to practice medicine in the Natchez area for several more years, but his private journals reveal that he never recovered from his knowledge of Isabel's fate. His entries from the later 1830s show increasing preoccupation with themes of guilt and justice, and he frequently wrote about the obligation of witnesses to speak truth regardless of social consequences. His final journal entry, made shortly before his death in 1841, consists of a single sentence: "Some secrets are too heavy for human souls to carry." The jewelry that had belonged to Isabel eventually found its way into private collections throughout the South, sold by Cornelius Beck and others who trafficked in such items. Pieces matching the description of her necklace and other ornaments surfaced occasionally in estate sales and auction houses. But by then, the connection to her story had been forgotten by all but a few historians and researchers interested in the darker aspects of antebellum society. In 1859, a group of researchers from the Mississippi Historical Society attempted to investigate the Isabel Walker case as part of a broader study of plantation life. However, they encountered resistance from surviving family members and community leaders who preferred that such stories remain buried. The researchers' notes, preserved in the Society's archives, indicate that they found additional evidence supporting the conclusions reached by Sheriff Morrison's investigation, but they were discouraged from pursuing the matter further. The American Civil War brought dramatic changes to the Mississippi River Valley, and in the chaos of those years, many records related to antebellum plantation life were lost or destroyed. The Walker case might have been forgotten entirely, were it not for the persistence of a few researchers who recognized its significance as a window into the brutal realities that existed beneath the veneer of Southern gentility. In 1923, Dr. Margaret Thornton, a historian studying women's lives in the antebellum South, rediscovered documents related to the Isabel Walker case while researching materials at the Adams County Courthouse. Dr. Thornton's analysis, published in the Journal of Southern History in 1925, provided the first scholarly examination of the evidence and drew attention to the case from researchers throughout the country. Dr. Thornton's work revealed that Isabel's story was not unique, but rather representative of a pattern of abuse and exploitation that had been systematically hidden by the social and legal structures of the antebellum South. Her research identified several similar cases in which enslaved women had disappeared under suspicious circumstances, often after refusing unwanted advances or threatening to reveal compromising information about their owners. The renewed interest in the case prompted additional investigation by researchers in the 1930s and 40s. Archaeological excavations conducted at the former Walker plantation site in 1938 uncovered foundations and artifacts that confirmed many details of the original investigation. Among the items discovered were pieces of jewelry that matched contemporary descriptions of ornaments that had belonged to Isabel. During the 1940s, oral histories collected from descendants of people who had lived on neighboring plantations provided additional details about the events of 1831. These accounts, passed down through generations, preserved information that had never been recorded in official documents. Several elderly informants described their grandparents' recollections of strange sounds and disturbing activities at the Walker plantation during the period surrounding Isabel's disappearance. The most significant breakthrough in understanding Isabel's fate came in 1958, when renovation work at the former site of Dr. Fairfax's medical practice uncovered a cache of documents that he had hidden before his death. Among these was a detailed account of his observations at the Walker plantation, written as what he termed a confession for posterity. This document provided explicit details about the conspiracy that had led to Isabel's death and confirmed the worst suspicions of earlier investigators. Dr. Fairfax's hidden confession revealed that Isabel had threatened to expose a relationship between Thomas Walker and herself that had resulted in her pregnancy. The pregnancy, according to Fairfax's account, posed an unacceptable threat to Walker's social standing and marriage, prompting him to arrange for Isabel's permanent removal. The physician's document described Walker's consultation with him about methods for terminating the pregnancy and his horror at discovering the lengths to which Walker was prepared to go to protect his reputation. The confession also revealed Dr. Fairfax's role in the cover-up that followed Isabel's death. Under pressure from Walker and other influential members of the community, he had provided false medical testimony about the cause of Millicent Walker's subsequent mental breakdown, attributing it to natural causes rather than to her knowledge of her husband's crime. The weight of this complicity had tormented him for the remainder of his life. Publication of Dr. Fairfax's confession in 1959 sparked renewed academic and public interest in the Isabel Walker case. Historians recognized it as one of the most thoroughly documented examples of the systematic violence that had been used to maintain the plantation system. The case became a focal point for scholars studying the intersection of race, gender, and power in the antebellum South. Further research conducted during the 1960s expanded understanding of the broader context in which Isabel's murder had occurred. Investigators discovered that Cornelius Beck had facilitated the disappearance of at least 12 other enslaved women throughout Louisiana and Mississippi during the same period. These cases followed a similar pattern. Women who had become problematic for their owners would simply vanish, with their disappearances explained as runaways or deaths from natural causes. The network that had enabled these crimes extended throughout the Gulf Coast region, involving merchants, physicians, lawyers, and plantation owners who protected each other through mutual silence and shared guilt. The system was so effective that most of these crimes were never officially investigated, let alone solved. Isabel's case was unusual only in that enough evidence survived to piece together what had actually happened. In 1963, the basement area beneath the former Walker Chapel was finally excavated under proper archaeological supervision. The work confirmed earlier findings and provided additional evidence about the conditions in which Isabel had been held before her death. Analysis of soil samples and material evidence suggested that she had been confined in the space for several weeks, during which time Beck had been arranging for her ultimate disposal. The excavation also uncovered evidence of other individuals who had been held in the basement at various times. Artifacts and personal items found in the space suggested that the Walker family had used the hidden room to confine people on multiple occasions. This discovery indicated that Isabel's case was part of a broader pattern of abuse that had continued over several years. Research conducted in the 1970s and 80s continued to add details to the understanding of Isabel's story. Genealogical investigations confirmed that she had indeed given birth to a child sometime before her disappearance, though records of what happened to the infant were never found. Some researchers theorized that the child had been killed along with Isabel, while others suggested that it might have been sold to another plantation owner far from Mississippi. The Isabel Walker case eventually became a standard subject of study in courses examining the social history of slavery. Her story was included in numerous textbooks and scholarly works as an example of the extreme violence that had been used to maintain racial and social hierarchies in the antebellum South. Museums throughout the region began incorporating her story into exhibits about plantation life, ensuring that future generations would understand the human cost of the system that had dominated Southern society. In 1996, the site of the former Walker plantation was designated as a historical landmark. A memorial to Isabel and others who had suffered similar fates was erected near the location where the chapel had once stood. The memorial inscription reads, "In memory of Isabel Walker and all those whose voices were silenced by violence and whose stories were buried by shame. Their suffering demands our remembrance, and their humanity deserves our honor." Recent scholarship has focused on placing Isabel's story within the broader context of gender-based violence in slave societies throughout the Americas. Comparative studies have revealed that her experience was representative of patterns that existed wherever systems of racial slavery were established. These studies have helped illuminate the ways in which the legal and social structures of slave societies enabled and concealed systematic violence against enslaved women. The jewelry that had belonged to Isabel continued to surface occasionally in private collections and estate sales well into the 21st century. Several pieces were eventually acquired by museums, where they serve as tangible reminders of her story. The necklace described by Dr. Fairfax was donated to the National Museum of African American History in 2015, where it is displayed as part of an exhibit about the experiences of enslaved women. Technological advances have enabled new approaches to investigating historical cases like Isabel's. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted at the former plantation site in 2010 revealed additional underground spaces that had not been previously discovered. These findings suggest that the full extent of the activities that took place at the Walker plantation may never be completely understood. Descendants of people who had been enslaved at neighboring plantations have contributed oral histories that provide additional context for understanding Isabel's story. These accounts, collected by community historians working to preserve local African American heritage, offer perspectives that had been absent from earlier investigations conducted primarily by white researchers. Their contributions have enriched understanding of how Isabel's disappearance was perceived and remembered within the enslaved community. The case continues to generate scholarly interest as historians develop new methods for studying the experiences of enslaved people whose lives were often documented only fragmentarily in official records. Isabel's story demonstrates both the possibilities and limitations of historical research when primary sources are limited and when powerful interests have worked to suppress information. Educational programs based on Isabel's story have been developed for use in schools throughout the Mississippi River Valley. These programs aim to help students understand the human reality behind historical abstractions about slavery and to recognize the importance of confronting difficult truths about the past. Teachers report that Isabel's story helps students grasp the personal impact of historical systems of oppression in ways that statistics and general descriptions cannot achieve. The site where Isabel lived and died remains a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to honor her memory and the memory of others who suffered similar fates. Visitors often leave flowers at the memorial, and the site has become a focal point for ceremonies marking significant dates in African American history. These observances ensure that Isabel's story continues to serve its essential function as a reminder of the human cost of systems that treat people as property. Annual conferences on the history of slavery frequently feature sessions devoted to examining cases like Isabel's. Scholars from around the world gather to share research methods and findings related to documenting the experiences of enslaved people. These academic gatherings serve an important function in ensuring that stories like Isabel's receive the scholarly attention necessary to preserve them for future generations. The Isabel Walker case demonstrates the importance of persistent historical investigation in uncovering truths that powerful interests have sought to bury. Her story serves as a reminder that behind every statistic about slavery lies an individual human being who experienced joy and suffering, hope and despair, love and violence. By preserving and studying these individual stories, historians help ensure that the full human impact of historical injustices is never forgotten. Modern visitors to Natchez can see the bluff where the Walker plantation once stood, though no trace of the original buildings remains. The Mississippi River continues its ancient course past the site, carrying the sediment of centuries toward the Gulf of Mexico. The landscape has changed dramatically since 1831, but the memory of what happened there persists in the historical record and in the collective memory of those who refuse to let such stories be forgotten. The investigation into Isabel Walker's disappearance and death ultimately revealed truths that extended far beyond the circumstances of a single tragedy. Her case exposed the systematic nature of the violence that underpinned the plantation system and demonstrated how legal and social structures could be manipulated to conceal even the most heinous crimes. The conspiracy of silence that protected her killers was representative of broader patterns that enabled countless similar atrocities throughout the antebellum South. Today, historians continue to study Isabel's case as a window into a world where human beings were treated as commodities and where the powerful could eliminate those who threatened their interests with virtual impunity. The documents that survived tell only part of her story, but they reveal enough to understand the systematic nature of the violence she endured and the callousness of those who orchestrated her death. The jewelry that had belonged to Isabel, scattered across the South through Cornelius Beck's network, serves as a lasting reminder of how the evidence of such crimes was dispersed and commodified. Each piece that surfaces in a collection or auction house represents not just an artifact of material culture, but a fragment of a life that was brutally ended to protect the reputation of those who claimed to represent civilization and refinement. The Mississippi River that flowed past the Walker plantation in 1831 continues its course today, carrying with it the soil and sediment of countless seasons. But the memory of what happened on that bluff remains fixed in the historical record, preserved by those who understood that some stories must never be forgotten, no matter how uncomfortable they make us feel about our past. Isabel Walker's name is now inscribed on the memorial that stands near the site of her suffering, but her true monument exists in the scholarly work that has documented her story and the educational programs that ensure new generations understand the human cost of systems built on the denial of human dignity. Her voice, silenced by violence in 1831, continues to speak through the historical record to all who will listen. In the end, the case of Isabel Walker reminds us that behind every system of oppression are individual human beings whose lives matter, whose suffering demands acknowledgement, and whose stories must be preserved against all efforts to bury them in silence. The jewelry may have been scattered, the buildings demolished, and the perpetrators long dead, but the truth endures. The river flows on, but the memory remains.